Hello and welcome to the 33 Ways Not to Screw Up podcast. And this podcast is about the book series, 33 Ways Not to Screw Up. I'm here today with Chip Scanlan, who is one of our authors. Chip, what's the name of your book?
33 Ways Not to Screw Up Your Journalism.
Right, okay. And so just for the audience, Chip is a writing coach, and an award-winning journalist. And you are a former director of writing programs and the National Writers Workshop at the Poynter Institute, which is one of the world's top schools for journalists. So let's talk a little bit about the motivation for the book. Can you tell me, like, why did you decide to write this book? Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into that?
Yeah, of course. Thanks. And I appreciate this opportunity, Alastair. I had published 2 editions of a journalism textbook and a short novel with going the traditional route. And in late December, my brother suggested a book idea. I've had a blog since the early aughts at Poynter. It was called Chip on Your Shoulder back then. And that morphed into what is now a Substack newsletter. And the one of the most popular, a recurring feature that's really among the most popular is something called 4 Questions With. And I ask writers and editors, people like Susan Orlean from the New Yorker and Dan Barry of the New York Times, and his columnist colleague Frank Bruni, and I'm up to 86 now, and I ask them the very same questions. What's the most important lesson you've learned as a writer? What's been the biggest surprise of your writing life? If you had to use a metaphor to describe yourself as a writer, what would it be? And there've been interesting answers there: pasta maker, widget maker, detectorist. And then finally, what's the single best piece of writing advice? And at the time I did it, I thought, oh, what if everybody answers the same way? But of course, they're writers, so they don't. And there's some repetition, but there's so much great stuff. And my brother, Jeff, who was my copy editor, I was on Tiny Letter at the time, the newsletter platform. He said, you've got enough for a book here. You've got 55 of these. My first reaction was, I'm too tired. And then he persuaded me, and I put together this collection. And like I said, I didn't want to go the traditional route. I wanted to go the indie route. And through total serendipity, Becky Blanton, who works with Melissa, got in touch with me, and basically was my Sherpa through the maze of Amazon KDP, and did a cover for me and helped me upload. And so that got published in late December 2021, those did. And then Becky said, there's this 33 Ways series. You should do one on journalism. And then she connected me with Melissa, who was Melissa Wilson of Networlding Publishing, who was this genie for writers, and has created an incredible supportive network of writers, 33 writers and others. And so after, thinking about it a bit, I thought, okay. And then, of course, I ran into the problem that I'm assuming that it's not an uncommon experience for 33 Ways authors. You think, I don't have 33 Ways. And then before you know it, you say, I can't limit it to 33 Ways. You have to give me more. And the other challenge is that I was a long form writer. I was a feature writer. And, I would write stories 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 words long for newspapers and magazines. And I had to write 500-word chapters. And Ann Hull, sorry, that's a former colleague. It's early in the morning. Ann Janser's book, How to Not Screw Up Your Business Emails, was an incredible role model for concision and delivering advice in digestible, easy chunks. So, between Becky and Melissa and Ann, I was able to produce this book pretty quickly. And that's how it came to be. And it came out in mid-December 2022. And it's been a great experience. It really has. I'm proud of the book, which is a nice feeling, to feel proud of a book.
Yeah, so I've written one of these for anybody who's not aware. I wrote one on podcasting, appropriately enough. Mine came out 2 weeks after yours, so just at the end of December, 31st of December, 2022, um, an hour before midnight, effectively, because I was determined to get the book finished and published in
Great.
2022.
Great.
But I found, like you, I found the constraints quite interesting. Now, I blew through the 500 words per chapter, so I nearly doubled that. But I did find that the
Yeah.
constraint was quite interesting. I found that the constraint of having to the number, it's one of these things where for me it was where the constraint becomes the inspiration, So
Yes,
I did
definitely.
find that. So yeah, I think it's really interesting when I get to talk to the other authors and see. I think your book in some ways is more similar to mine, in that it's quite a comprehensive guide to
Yeah.
journalism. Would
Yeah.
that be true?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I think it is. I think it is.
Can,
I
can you
mean,
can you talk to me a little bit then about some of those really key points for you? Did you take it from the top? So is your number one the most important one for you?
that's a good question. I guess it is. It's the screw up is called being inhuman. Um, the solution is to be human. And popular culture has portrayed journalists as unethical creeps with notepads. And polls show, the public's disdain for journalists. And sadly, that's true in a lot of cases. But the best journalists I've come in contact, and it's been thousands now over the last, 30 years, whether it's conventions or coaching, the best journalists, they are human. Lindsay Addario, who's a photographer for the New York Times, she photographed the Ukrainian woman and her two children who were killed fleeing. They were killed by Russian mortars, fleeing a town, and they were caught and killed. And they eventually tracked down the husband, but he was going to go identify them at the morgue, and he said that they could come along, and they said no, no. She said it was too private. And a lot of journalists, I think, would have said, "Oh yeah, geez, that's great," you know. And instead, what they got was he told the whole story of their life and death in a future story. So, being human can help. I had a personal experience once. I was at the Providence Journal, and my beat, if you had to name it for a long time, was death. And so I was assigned to cover a story about a young woman on the verge of getting married who was caught in a crossfire between the cops and an escapee and was killed. And I had to go, you have to go to the family and see if you can get a comment. And it's a terrifying thing. You really have to be counterphobic to do it, because it's such a fearful notion. And so I didn't drag my heels, but I forced myself to do it. I'm standing in front of the door, and all of a sudden I had a flash of insight. And when the father opened the door, I introduced myself and my organization, and I said I was very sorry for their loss, but we were doing a story about what happened. And I just didn't want you to pick up the Sunday paper and say, couldn't they at least have asked if you wanted to say something? And it was like open sesame. And within minutes, I was in her bedroom, and they were showing me, the latest gift of copperware that had come in, and her hope chest. And it just provided, rich detail for the story. And, that's a really good, if you want to call it an actionable step, is to be a human first.
You reframed the situation when you spoke to them by doing that.
Yeah, I did. You're right. I guess I did. I hadn't thought about that. It pays off. I mean, I don't want it to sound manipulative.
I sometimes think that when we're talking about this kind of thing, about where you're talking about authenticity and then you're thinking strategically about it, that it can sound manipulative. But I think that if you're coming from the right place, then I think that it's coming from a place of love and ethics and wanting to be human, like you're talking about. I think I think that's the
Yeah.
right way.
And one of the things, one of the reasons I was assigned the death beat and was successful about it was I lost my father when I was 9 years old. And there is a bond between people who have suffered interfamily death. And I would pretty quickly establish with them that I had lost my father. And I always felt, I don't know if it's true, but I always felt they thought, okay, he knows the territory. And, that's another way of being human, revealing something about yourself, not going overboard about it, but just saying, hey, look, I don't know what you're going through, but I know I went through it. And I hope you'll trust me. I think it's so much as a matter, Alastair, of trust.
Mm-hmm.
As a journalist, you have to build trust immediately. You have like a minute or two to convey to people and for them to accept it. Okay, this is a trustworthy person. And I'm gonna tell him things maybe that I wouldn't normally tell people. You ask a question, you ask it softly, you ask one question only. It's an open-ended question: what, why, how, not did you. It has to be yes or no, a binary question, and then you just shut up. And that's such an important lesson. It's so hard for journalists to do, is to shut up, and
That's something personally I had to learn that with podcasting. I had a guest on this morning who was actually afraid of coming on the podcast. I don't know what I'm going to say. I asked the first question and he spoke for 9 minutes straight because I just looked at the audio. So yeah, but I think you're right. But we also have a time limit to hit on this podcast.
Exactly. I do have a tendency to rattle on.
So let me ask you about some of the other issues or mistakes that you've seen, and I'm really interested in You Suck FM because I really feel that one. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I had this personal experience where I would find myself, my fingers frozen over the keyboard, and I would hear a voice whispering, "You suck." And I would think, who's that? What's that? And then I realized it's me. And, call it imposter syndrome. In the interpretation of dreams, Freud named it the watcher at the gate, which, basically locks your creative side up. And it's an important thing. It happens to so many writers. And so many writers I coach, they're blocked. And there is this terrific tool or technique called free writing, which I wasn't aware of growing up, where basically, kids in grammar school now are taught this, my grandchildren are taught this. Basically, you put your pen to the pad or your fingers to the keyboard, and you begin typing as fast as you can. And you don't go back and correct punctuation or spelling, which is very hard for journalists. You just keep going. You keep going. And it is astonishing. I have seen it so often with the journalists I coach, the writers I coach, how they very quickly enter the zone. It becomes a flow moment where time disappears. And you would think that, well, I've let down all my guards, but what you've let down you've let down the gate and allowed your creative side to pour forth. And of course, you then, it's not perfect. You have to revise. Writing is about one thing, I believe: revision. And so what I say is, and the funny story is that it was an editor at the LA Times who said, "Yeah, I hear it all the time. It's like a radio station." And I said, "Oh my gosh, You Suck FM." And so I said, we should have a hit list. We should have a playlist. And the first song that came to mind was Beck's Soy and Perdedor. Soy and Perdedor, I'm a loser, baby, so why don't you kill me? And it's I think because there's so much anxiety around the writing process, that recognizing the fear and then combating it, having a technique to combat it, you can churn out so much. I would tell people when they say, "Well, how much time do I have?" And I would say, "How fast can you type?" And it actually transformed my writing career.
So there's a huge amount of crossover between what you're just talking about for journalists and for people in my space who are in content creation, particularly like self-employed experts and people like that who want to,
Sure.
post content on LinkedIn or social media or, videos on YouTube and things like that. One of the reasons why I record this live now, and I'm going to put this straight up on YouTube after we talk and onto the podcast, is because if I don't do that, if I say I'm going to edit it, then it goes into this whole thing where it gets locked in, and my perfectionism starts to take over and tries to make everything perfect and polished, and
Right.
so, and it's exactly that. It's the same thing. It's this it's you can't put out something that's imperfect, so don't put it out at all. And so I think
Yeah,
it's the same.
yeah.
Now you mentioned having the right techniques to combat that. Can you talk about, like, what are the techniques to get past that?
Well, free writing is the major technique.
Mm-hmm.
And it is so simple. It's basically you write as fast as you can. And basically you write as fast as you can because the inner critic is saying, "Hey, get back here, you suck." But you've outraced the DJ. And that's the single most important tool. And if I had to offer writers one suggestion, it would be practice free writing. When I'm writing, if I find my fingers poised over the keyboard, I realize, oh my gosh, and I start writing, and I begin with gibberish. I often, if you look at my free writes, they begin with, "I'm really tired. I don't have any ideas." And then all of a sudden I think, but I was thinking about this today, and all of a sudden my fingers start moving, and they start
So are you
moving
actually writing
faster.
your stream of consciousness?
Yes, it is. That's
Okay.
another word. It is stream of consciousness.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. I want to move on because
Sure.
I know that there's a whole bunch of really interesting things locked up in your brain that I want to get out here. Can you pick another point from your book? Because there's a whole bunch of them, and I don't know which one's the best or the most interesting or the most important. Can you pick another one to discuss here with us?
Yeah, you got to be counterphobic. And quickly, I was in a class at Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, and my teacher, Melvin Mencher, said, "If you want to be a journalist, you have to be counterphobic." And then he moved on. And I stopped. I raised my hand. I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "You have to do what you fear." And he didn't know what a nerve he had struck, because I'd only been a reporter for a year at a small paper. And I was terrified most of the time of interviewing people. I thought they would slam the doors. I envisioned them coming to the doors with shotguns. I mean, I have a vivid imagination. And I found that it's not true. All right, some people may slam the door in your face, but if you approach respectfully, and so I've presented this idea to several college journalism classes. And my experience with college journalism classes is it's very hard, well, especially with the young men, to get them to talk, to ask a question. The young women are always more forthcoming. But because the subject is do what you fear, I would challenge them. Come on, I want you to, come on, do what you fear. Actually, there's a rule for me. If you want to know what to do, ask yourself what you're afraid of. Do it. And all of a sudden, these young men would come out and talk about how anxious they were about talking with strangers. And, there are ways to do it. I've got a friend who swears by a hot shower, and, another one who swears by chamomile tea. But for me, it's just do it. There's an adage in journalism. Journalism is about one thing: gulp and go. And that's the method that I had to use. So that to me is one of the it's a really major chapter in the book for me, to the notion of counterphobia, introducing it, because most people don't know what it is, just like I didn't know what it was, and then to encourage them to combat that.
It's interesting because what you're talking about here is you're talking about resisting the fear, which again is going back to the USOC FM point as well. And it's all about pushing through this fear. It's actually something that I mentioned in my book as well. It's actually my number one point, which is at the end, was 33. But which is, don't let things hold you back, just get started. And I think that you're kind of saying the same thing here. And it just seems to me this seems to be like an overarching point through what you're talking about and the stuff that I'm doing as well. So I think it's very interesting to see that kind of crossover. It's really, really important to do that, because otherwise we won't get stuff done.
No, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, and I know that it's something I think about when I'm creating content, because I'm also a content consumer. I read a lot, I listen to podcasts a lot, and I think about what's the point of me consuming content if I don't then take some action based on what I just learned? Because if I just listen to it and let it sit, that information isn't really doing much good. I mean, maybe I'll use it later, but for the most part, unless we actually take action on that. So I think those ideas are connected in some way, and I'm not really sure where the line is between them, but I think that those things are all connected in some way. So I think it's interesting that that's such a big focus of what you're talking about in this book.
Well, I had a friend once say, Chip, it's interesting, you've made a career from your neuroses. I said, I guess I did.
There's something else I have to ask you about. You have a quote from Dan Rather, who is a very famous journalist in the US, excellent for journalists of all ages and experiences. How did you get Dan Rather to have a look at your book? Can you tell us the connection there?
Yeah, sure. Teaching at Poynter exposed me to a lot of leading journalists. I never met Dan Rather, but he'd been a hero since I watched him reporting from the Vietnam War. And so I guess I was casting about for blurbs, and his name popped to mind, and I didn't have a contact for him. And but a colleague at Poynter, I just emailed him. I said, do you have a Dan Rather? He was a broadcast faculty member. I said, do you have Dan Rather's email? And he did. And I just cold emailed him and said about the book. And I specifically said I wanted to get this book in the hands of every journalist, teacher, student, writer, writing coach. And he wrote back, I believe in long shots, which I mean, let's face it, it helped to be able to put Poynter in the subject heading, because in the world of journalism, Poynter is, well known and, revered among, it's revered by many people. It's a terrific school. And I spent 15 years there. And I was amazed by his generosity. So, it was serendipity, it was networking, and a very generous man. And he gave me a nice blurb, and we were able to put it on the cover. So,
yeah, and it's great to have. I mean, it really speaks to the quality of what you've done that he would be willing to put his name to it. So I think that's great.
Yeah, it was great. It's an exciting thing about the book.
I want to ask you briefly about the 33 Ways community, the authors community, because this is something I know from speaking with Melissa on the podcast and about this series. I know she's really keen for us as authors to talk about what that means for us. So can you tell us a little bit about what, how you're finding that community and what it's like for you?
Well, I'm sure as a content creator, it's a solitary pursuit. And Melissa has, she has this fierce desire to create communities. And so every 2 weeks, the 33 Ways authors, and then new authors who have different topics are introduced. And we go around the room and share successes and share ideas, and we review each other's works on Amazon and Goodreads, which is terrific to do that. But it's a way to, it's great. I really love looking at a Zoom meeting of kindred spirits. And so it's been an enormous boon for me to be able to have that community and to meet people like you, who I would never have met, I don't think. And it's to have met Ann Janser was such a role model for me and so many other people. It's had an enormous benefit. I can't describe it with more enthusiasm, I don't think.
Yeah, I love the I love the networking effects of it. Getting to know other people who are all doing the same thing. When you get enough people in the room who are all trying to achieve the same goals and sharing information, there is this multiplying effect of the research that everybody's doing on their own thing, because they can share it. And I think it just it's this rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing that you get when you're in that. The other thing is that, there's like, ultimately we want to get our books into people's hands, and having it be part of the series, I think, is really beneficial in that way, because when people buy one of our books, they see the other books in the series. So I think that's
exactly.
huge as well. So I find it very positive.
Yeah, me too.
So what's next for you? What are you working on? Are you working on another book? Are you
yeah, pardon me for the frog in my throat. I'm going to put when I reach 100 interviews, I'm going to do a second edition to the Writers on Writing, because it's really been popular. And so I want to do that. And beyond that, I think I'm going to turn to fiction, which is, I grew up wanting to be a fiction writer. I actually grew up wanting to be a rich, famous novelist, but there were no signs that said wanted rich, famous novelist will train. And so, so I have, I've got an idea for a novel that I've done a lot of research on, and I really want to do that. It's like, it's one of those things where it's a bucket list thing that I want to do. But I continue, every 2 weeks to do my newsletter and, have these great interviews with people. And, it's very exciting to meet young writers and, writers of color, and, give them the attention that they don't normally get. It's the really big stars that get it. And so it's a combination of big stars and then people that are rising stars. And I really like doing that. And I also write a craft lesson too, where I focus on an aspect of the craft of writing. And I post an inspirational quote, and I give people ideas for readings or listening. And then, what's nice about Substack is with paid subscribers, you can do anything you want. So I've been using it to, actually, this is something I didn't mention. I'm writing a memoir about my experiences as a callow American in French West Africa, serving as a Peace Corps volunteer.
Wow, very interesting.
Yeah, kind of a comedy of errors. And what I've done is, I told my paid subscribers, I'm going to deliver an installment every time I give you this. And it keeps me honest, it keeps me motivated. And I hope I can finish that this year.
It's really interesting, because that just reminds me that a lot of the what are now really famous classic novels were actually written in installments for newspapers and things. So,
oh yeah, exactly.
Which puts them in a totally different context,
Yeah.
So okay, so the book is available on Amazon in print and ebook form.
And audio too. I did the audiobook version.
You've done the audiobook. Excellent. Right. That's on my to-do list. So that's cool. So people can listen to it too. And I know a lot of people love to listen to audiobooks, particularly when they're driving.
Yeah. Well, it'll be a snap for you, given your
Hopefully so. Yeah, I need to set aside a weekend where I'm just not doing anything and just blast through it in one go. I think that's the best way for me to try and
If I
do it.
had one piece of advice, my microphone malfunctioned twice, and so it meant that I had to read the book 3 times,
Mhm.
record the book 3 times, and it was so good. It's one thing to read the book aloud, but to actually record it,
Mhm.
you just learn to breathe and to slow down. So I really, that was a good thing for me.
Yeah,
That screw up um, really proved to be a
beneficial.
source of great, you know, not pride, but well, kind of pride, but it made it better each time.
Mhm. Yeah, and somebody did say to me, and unfortunately the way I did it, I was so belligerent about that I was going to meet my personal goal of publishing in 2022
Mhm.
that I didn't do the audiobook before I published. I published the print book first. But some people have told me that, before you go to print, record your audiobook and you will almost certainly find things that you want to change just through the process of doing it.
Oh yeah, that's such a great idea. I hadn't thought
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So for next time for both of us, um so I'm also thinking about, is there another book that I could write for the 33 Way series? So that's also
Yes, yes.
that's also in the back of my head. So yeah, so Chip, your email list is on Substack. Can you tell people where they can find you if they want to learn
Yeah,
more?
yeah. Well, my email is chipscan, CHIPSCAN @gmail.com. My Substack is Chip Scanlan, and it's SCANLAN .substack.com. And you can subscribe for free. I try to give my free subscribers a good diet of things. And then every 2 weeks, paid subscribers get more. It's like $5 a month or $50 a year. Yeah, people can reach me there. And actually, my phone number is 727. I feel like Lindsey Graham. My phone number is 727-366-8119. And I tell people in my newsletter, hey, give me a call. I'm a writer. I'm happy to be interrupted. I'll give you a free consultation.
Yeah,
So, people hear
cool.
this and want to call me. I'll answer.
That's awesome. Well, Chip, your website is chipswritinglessons.com, and I'm going to put all
Yes.
of these in the show notes. We'll link to all of those, your social media, etc., so people can find it, and of course to your book, which is also on the website at 33waysseries.com. So,
Thank you.
yeah, Chip, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great to chat with you.
It's been wonderful chatting with you.
And
You're good at this, man. You
yeah,
make it relaxed and easy to have a conversation.
yeah, I think that's well, it's easy when the guest is knows their stuff, and that's the great thing about doing this podcast with the authors, because everybody is an author, everybody's an expert, and has already written about their subject area, so it's easy to talk about usually. So okay, thank you for listening, and you can find more episodes and Chip's book and the rest of the series at 33wayseries.com, and the next episode will be coming up in your podcast feed in a week or two once we record another episode. So thanks, and see you in the next one.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alastair.
Thanks, Chip.